2:30 sharp. So allow me to officially welcome everyone, wishing everyone a good afternoon, and thank you for taking the time to officially join this third focus session dedicated to the upcoming Digital Europe pilot exercise. It is a pleasure to have you here with us, also those in the meeting, but also following the live stream. Before getting into the topic and introducing our speakers for today, I would like to remind you some practical information on the event. First of all, you are automatically muted, but this does not mean you cannot reach us. I want to encourage all of you to please engage, share your questions, share your comments with us. In the end, the purpose of this event is to make sure we have an open space so that we can be of help in supporting you prepare for the technical and also operational aspects of the Digital Europe pilot. In order to do that, feel free to submit your questions via the QR code that you should see on the screen. We will first address pre-submitted questions and then follow with those that we receive live as the event goes on. So please follow this process and don't try to raise your hand or directly unmute. In case we have no time to answer all the questions, which is what happened last time, don't worry, we will make sure to include them in our pilot FAQ section that's available on our website. Okay, before diving in, allow me to briefly introduce myself. My name is Georgina Garriga Sanchez, and I am the press officer responsible for the Digital Europe project. It's a pleasure to moderate this event today. Also quite important because, as you are all aware, it's only a couple of weeks until the deadline to apply to join the Digital Europe pilot. The call will close on 14 May, and the pilot is set to start in the second half of 2027. To support that, earlier this month, we published key documents for participating in the pilot, namely the participation agreement, which lays down your role and responsibilities, as well as the front end and back end technical specifications. The plan for today is to help you understand better these documents and support your application before the deadline. And in order to do this, it's my pleasure to be accompanied by Digital Europe Project Director Evelyn Whitlocks, Team Lead of the Individual and Business Users, Sebastian Ziepen, Team Lead of the Online Use Cases team, Markus Hertel, and the expert from the Digital Euro Service Platform Functional Interactions team, Dragana Jovanovska. Welcome to all of you. And without further ado, let's officially kick off this session. And let me start, Evelyn, by passing the floor to you to give us some insights of how are we going to structure the session today.
Thank you, Georgina, and thank you for everybody that's online with us. It's a pleasure to have you here again. We are doing these focus sessions in order to make sure that everybody is well prepared ahead of the application deadline, as Georgina said at the beginning. So just a short recall. So on the 15th of January, we had the first focus session, which introduced more the Digital Euro pilot with the points that you see on the slide and will be at this point familiar to you. This call for expression for interest is focused on the PSPs. We published on the 5th of March, as Georgina also already said, the documentation that supports the call for expression of interest, which included quite a number of technical, operational, and functional requirements, in which we did a deep dive in March 20th. Today, we want to give you a voiceover and explanation and the room to ask questions on two additional documents that we published. One is the legal document, which is called the PSP Participation Agreement. But alongside with that, we also published the implementation specifications, both the front end and the back end specifications. So today, we're going to take you through these three documents. We start with the PSP Participation Agreement, then the front end and then the back end specifications, and then we will close. After each section, there is a short Q&A, which will be moderated by Georgina. So with that, I hope that we will have a successful focus session again, and I hand back to Georgina first, and then potentially to Sebastian.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Evelyn. Now we are officially ready to go. Moving on to the first presentation. And in the meantime, let me remind you to please keep sending your questions. As Evelyn just said, we will have a Q&A after each presentation. So without further ado, Sebastian, over to you to tell us more on the participation agreement for payment service providers.
Yes, thanks a lot, Georgina, and good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon again. I think, as Evan said, it's our third session with you guys, and as a follow-up of the publication published in March now, as Evan highlighted, as well as Georgina outlined, we published this month the participation agreement, and together with this, the respective annexes and 7 appendices, actually. In addition to that, we had the back and front end specs. Here to note, importantly, they are outside of the scope of the participation agreement, but of course very relevant for you PSPs when assessing your application, and hence Marcus and Rajana will run through them subsequently. The main document is the participation agreement, and here it's important to note that is ultimately the contract between the participating NCBs and each pilot PSP taking part in the pilot. It sets out the roles, activities, and obligations for pilot parties, as well as the conditions under which the pilot is conducted. Before, however, I now go into detail of the participation agreement, I would like to briefly focus on the annexes and appendices. Most of these documents we already shared in a similar fashion in context of the call for expression of interest, and we discussed them in detail during the last focus session. However, there are a few areas which we didn't discuss previously, and I want to shortly touch on this. This is firstly the Annex 3, which is the pilot PSP feedback framework. That defines how quantitative data and qualitative feedback will be obtained from pilot PSPs and end users and transmitted before, during, and after the pilot. And this, of course, also includes the respective roles and responsibilities of both the pilot PSPs and participating national central banks. The communication guidelines, the Annex 4, sets out how PSPs may communicate internally and externally about the pilot. Here it is important for us that this is done in a factual, neutral way, aligned with general Eurosystem communication on the pilot. And then we have Appendix 2A, in itself not a very detailed document, but very important document because it serves as a reference map to the full documentation package, including requirements, architecture, onboarding, user journeys, end-to-end flows, and the pilot timeline. And with that, however, let me turn to the core of the documentation, the participation agreement. So as said, the participation agreement details the roles and obligations of both pilot PSPs and participating NCBs. And here also based on, and thanks a lot for this, actually are the questions you pre-submitted to us, let us highlight the key elements. Firstly, now on scope and principle. The contract is strictly limited to the pilot, and as mentioned at the beginning, it enters into force once the pilot PSP and the respective NCB sign it. This will happen before the actual start of the development phase, approximately in July, we believe, and automatically ends at the conclusion of the pilot. One of the key principles in the pilot is an opportunity to test and validate the operational and technical readiness for a potential digital euro. Therefore, the agreement is built around that principle too. It supports learning and co-development, bringing together the ECB, the NCBs, and of course, the pilot PSPs. In that context, it is clearly in everyone's interest to ensure a successful pilot and facilitate this. The NCBs may have the right to amend the contract to reflect evolving needs, this be it on a technical side or operational side. And however, those amendments will not just happen overnight and you just need to accept them. However, you can review them and possibly object to them. And in the event of such an objection, pilot PSPs are expected to engage constructively and cooperate with the respective NCBs, with always a shared objective to reach a resolution. If despite these efforts, no mutually acceptable solution is reached, the possibility to terminate the contract, of course, remains. However, and I think that's an important principle of the contract, there's ample time for finding an amicable solution. And that is key for us because it's a collaborative project, the pilot. And for that, I think it's key for us that we ensure amicable solutions when there may be a conflict. The agreement furthermore provides a description of the pilot in line with what we discussed previously, so we'll not go into depth there. It covers the beta digital euro, the 4 defined use cases, and hence the controlled environment. And it's important to note, and we have always said this, the pilot will last for 12 months. However, the agreement also provides an option to extend the pilot for up to 6 months, and that is beneficial, possibly for the purpose of the pilot, and will then be considered possibly. Let me briefly explain what's required at the end of the pilot. So at the end, the agreement outlines that pilot PSPs will be offboarded from the desk by the participating NCBs. However, before that, the PSPs will offboard all end users, ensuring a smooth wind down of the pilot activities. This includes also clearing the balances, and particularly for offline, a reasonable effort is here asked to conduct this. However, here also noting the required support of end users. And finally, then the DCA will be closed. Noting that participating PSPs may be selected again to take part in a subsequent phase, the contract caters for a scenario where an existing setup could be retained, for example, the DCA. And for that, then no new onboarding would be required. While this is not yet confirmed, it clearly shows for us that participation in the pilot is something that can provide for continuity and reduce future implementation effort. Having said this, at the same time, we remain fully committed to ensuring a level playing field for all PSPs across the Euro area, both for those that participate in the pilot and those that are rather on the observation side here. And we will therefore keep you closely informed on how this evolves and goes over the coming months. Last but not least, let me turn to the obligations and liability, which we understand is a key area for you when assessing the participation in the pilot as PSP. First, on obligations. For pilot PSPs, the responsibilities are, for example, development integration work, as well as the testing then with the desk, including validation activities. And it also includes, of course, the onboarding and offboarding of end users, providing support to them, and collecting feedback throughout the pilot, amongst others. On the NCB side, participating NCBs will provide operational and technical support. For example, for onboarding activities, NCBs will support with national service desk activities. This can be, for example, the validation of reference data. And pilot locations, and this includes the ECB actually, will, for example, actively support the onboarding of pilot business end users. And we have a collaborative approach here established, which should be well coordinated. And by that, we have an operational experience across pilot stakeholders that is beneficial and efficient. Now, last but not least, let me turn to liability. Liability between the parties is limited and applies only in case of gross negligence or willful misconduct resulting in loss or damage. There are also clear exclusions from liability, in particular in case of force majeure or actions by third parties. And finally, on dispute resolution, disputes may arise. They can happen. However, if they arise, the first step is always negotiation between the parties. And this should reflect, and for us reflects, the cooperative and collaborative nature of the pilot, with all of us having in mind the joint interest of having a successful pilot. It's important for us to resolve disputes in a constructive manner and seek to find an amicable solution. And on that positive note, Georgina, let me hand back to you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Sebastian. While you were talking, we received a lot of questions, so I will try to cluster them as much as possible. The first one is on the scope of the exercise, and it goes like that. The call for expression of interest refers to 4 prioritized use cases, while the PSP participation agreement has included online business-to-person refund transactions under online P2B use cases. Does this mean a new prioritized use case has been introduced?
Thanks for the question, and a good question. Actually, we discussed it when drafting the agreement, and no, to be very simple, no, this is no new use case. It is ultimately the refund transaction that is linked to the person-to-business use case, so the P2B transactions, be it either in the remote scenario or the proximity scenario, so e-commerce, or at the POS. And it's just something that we introduced here. On the one hand, it's under regulatory framework, something that is common practice, such as PSD2, but also it just provides additional clarity on the transaction types that are actually supported for the pilot. However, it should not be seen as a distinct or new use case. It's just ultimately, in case a refund happens, I don't like the suit or whatever I purchased possibly, And for that, I receive a refund that is then linked to that specific use case.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you, Sebastian. A very relevant one for most of our viewers on costs. If the pilot is intended mainly for learning purposes, does this mean our investments risk becoming sunk costs if the product is later redesigned? Which elements could potentially carry over to the next phase?
Okay, so Georgina, that is a question that has been coming up multiple times, was also raised in context of the Rule Development Group discussions and with the ERPB. So overall, yes, indeed. So the pilot is there that to learn and validate. However, from our perspective, it will not be ultimately everything done. There will be sunk cost. Of course, we want to learn. We want to develop as well based on the feedback received the digital further. However, as I think if you look at the documentation and what we have published there, the baseline for the pilot design is from an infrastructure point of view on the Eurosystem side, or when looking as well at the documentation, be for example specifications that Markus will allude to on the front end, for example. This is based on the work done with the rulebook. And hence, all of what we are looking into and testing right now is based on the work done for a possible launch of the Digital Euro. Also, then again, as we announced this last week, with the signing of the agreement with the 3 leading European standard setters, we are building many of our opportunities here based on existing specifications, right? Things that can be reused again. So not only for the purpose of the pilot, not only for the purpose of the Digital Euro, but as well for other setups. And now concretely looking, I think, to your second question, or part of the question, which alludes to a bit, okay, what can we concretely reuse? So I alluded to this in my presentation. So the participation agreement provides for that opportunity, right? So in case there is a continuity for the next phase of a PSP that participates to the pilot, certain setups can be retained there, be it on the DCA side, be it on the interfaces towards the desk. And also, actually, to be clear and frank here, this has a positive for the Eurosystem as well, because we need to onboard the PSPs for the pilot, also thereafter possibly, and hence there's an effort on the NCB and ECB side for that. And with that, of course, we have in mind that existing investments or the connectivity, for example, made can be reused. And with that in mind, I think, yes, there's learning, but there's an investment that from our perspective can be certainly reused for subsequent phases in context of the Digital Euro.
Thanks, Sebastian. I think that was very clear. One of the distinctive elements of the Digital Euro is its offline functionality, and we are getting a lot of questions on that. Sebastian, what constitutes reasonable efforts by a PSP to ensure offline balances are cleared?
So indeed, and I think this is one of the activities that needs to happen at the end of the pilot. Both the online as well as the offline balances will need to be cleared, right? And of course, on the offline side, there's a dependency, and that dependency is actually on the end user, me, you, Georgina, who may be participating to the pilot, and without our support, actually the defunding here will not fly, right? And hence, we say there needs to be a reasonable effort by PSPs to facilitate this. And a reasonable effort is what you should have a plan, right? You should maybe notify and remind the end users that, hey, pilot is over, defunding should be happening. And in situations where the end users are not responsive or cannot be reached, PSP should proactively try that. You have your existing communication channels of how you do reach out and try to contact the end users to do so. And of course, also be in touch with the national central banks, with us and so forth to see that we facilitate this.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Sebastian. I'm running out of time for your segment, but I want to ask you 2 questions in one to answer very briefly. They move from the operational design to the regulatory one. Can you tell us briefly which regulatory requirements apply to the activities of the PSPs for the pilot, and also how and whether PSPs can communicate about their pilot participation?
Okay, so then firstly on regulatory requirements. Again, this is a question that either PSPs brought to us directly, but also our national central banks indirectly, and we are currently discussing this topic. Again, given the controlled setting and distinct features of the pilot, we are exploring at the moment the most appropriate approach to, on the one hand, achieve the pilot's objectives, but of course also be aligned with important and relevant regulatory requirements, since in principle, prior to the entry in force of the digital legislation, pilot PSPs are subject to existing laws, and this PSD2, GDPR, AMLR, etc. However, again, while the existing regulatory framework applies to the pilot, and I think that's also clear per the agreement, I can just emphasize that we fully recognize that the pilot fees are designed to take place within a controlled environment, very limited environment actually, and for that we have restricted number of staff participating. In that context, we discuss as well the regulatory framework for the pilot with important stakeholders. And then maybe shortly on communication. Yes, of course, PSPs participating to pilot should communicate it and are allowed to communicate. Actually, we have guidelines for this, right, on how that can be done and should be done. And here there are certain things that PSPs can do. For example, they say you participate in the pilot, you describe your role in a factual, general way, you refer to the information that we are publishing on our site. However, there are certain things also you shouldn't do, right? And for example, present your pilot activities as your own products or brand them with your own branding, etc. And of course, also you shouldn't be disclosing any confidential information. And in case of doubt, the NCBs, as said, this is a collaborative, cooperative approach. We work closely together. And with that in mind, I think reach out, ask questions, what you shall and shall not publish. And I think the feedback here received so far was quite clear, and the communication guidelines should facilitate this.
Absolutely. In case of doubt, please always reach out. Thanks a lot, Sebastian. I would like now to move on to the next presentation on front-end specifications and give the floor to Marcus.
Thank you, Georgina. Good afternoon also from my side. Happy to be here the first time, not like Sebastian with some legacy. So, as Sebastian said, we shared with you the front and the back end specifications. And what I want to do today is guide you a bit what is covered in them, what parts you find where, and especially what is the differentiation between the front end and the back end specifications, and why do we have two parts of them. So what is defined in the front end, or what defines the front end? The front end is everything where you have, as we can see on this picture, an interaction with the end user, meaning in some way or the other, the transaction is initiated by the end user. This can be either a business user or a private individual, and the front-end specs govern their relation with the respective PSP. This can be the distributing PSP, or it can be the acquiring PSP. So we have different kind of interactions, as we see on the picture. If we think about a normal person-to-person transaction, we would see something where one user interacts with their phone with the other user, and both are then connected to their respective distributing PSPs. However, we also have in the use cases the mobile POS setting, where you would initiate a transaction by a user on a mobile POS in a merchant environment, and which would then link to the respective acquiring PSP. All these interactions are now governed in the specification, and the idea of the specification was to take all the different things we published, be it the user requirements, be it minimum UX requirements, all kind of documents, and bundle them, translate them into one coherent and consistent document, which you can then pass on to your developers so that they know what to do. But let's look at that in a bit more in detail. So what we see here at first glance might be a bit of overwhelming picture, but bear with me, I will guide you slowly through it. What we see is a stylized architecture view, and it should reflect all possible actors, and it reflects also the majority of the services or the functionalities which you find in the ecosystem, especially in the front end, as this is the part which we are looking at. And it really covers everything. On the left-hand side, if we start there, you see again the individual user. it goes through their distributing PSP, which we had also on the previous slide, but it also includes still the connection with the backend. And on the top part, we have the acquiring side, with on the left-hand side then the different merchant environments, be it E or M commerce or the soft POS. But as I said, the front-end specification only focus on the front-end interaction. So what we now look at is only the left-hand side. The connection of the different PSPs with DESP is something which Dragana will cover then in the second part. So we have all the different use cases now mapped out, and let us go step by step through them. If we look at the lower left-hand corner, we see two first interaction points, this being either the PSP provided app or it is the app of the Eurosystem. Both are go-to places for a user when they want to start any kind of interaction. And that is then linked with the distributing PSPs with all the different services. We'll get to some of the services in a minute. But if we now stick to the P2P transaction, which we had on the first slide, this would be reflected by the green arrow. So in the specifications, you will find everything which governs this relationship, meaning everything your PSP, your app implementation or the implementation of the digital Eurosystem needs to connect with your distributing PSP. And you see no green arrow on the upper part. That's simply for the reason that a P2P transaction is only between distributing PSPs. They both play a role. But what you see also here, it is only stylized, even though we will have two users interacting. We only have one time pictured here the pilot PSP app or the digital Euro PSP app. If we look at E&M commerce, you find something which we introduced on top to make life and integration a bit easier and also to better reflect the real life situation, that being the business end user systems. Because when we drafted a specification, it became apparent relatively quickly that it is too shortcut to simply define E&M commerce environments and what they need to do, because there was a clear request by the market. And it's important to understand we didn't develop anything here in isolation. All that was developed with market participants in the rulebook development groups. And they stressed, especially from the merchant side, guys, you need to distinguish which function needs to be done by the backend system of a merchant and which function is really front-end related, meaning user interaction point. So everything where a user sees or does something is the really left-hand side, while then in the end user, the business end user systems, that's more this E&M commerce backend, not to be mixed up with the PSP backend, to which it then subsequently connects. We have all these different services now outlined, and it is important that all services will be called at some point, but never all simultaneously. So if we look at access management, that's something only for the real beginning. However, if we have a transaction, then you will very likely call transaction management services. You might need liquidity management services if we are thinking about a waterfall or reverse waterfall included into a transaction. And you see also common services. What that entails, we will have a look at the next slide then. So this is the high-level overview, but as said, my point was to give you a bit of an understanding what is covered in the actual specifications and how they are structured. What you see here, and I think that became already clear from the picture, the specifications are not structured along use cases. If we would have done that, we would have created a lot of duplications, as many of these things show up at several points. And as I said, the focus was to build something which is more tailored at developers and for the integration with systems. So what we did we followed that architectural view, which you still have in small on the left-hand side. So we started from the left, and then we worked our way together with the market participants through the ecosystem. This means you have access management services on the distributing side, but also on the acquiring side. For both it applies. With access management services, we, for example, cover things like user onboarding, users being merchants, but also private individuals. And then liquidity management services, we have to get money in the system in the first place. We have to manage waterfalls and reverse waterfalls. We have to link accounts, which we can use for funding. Then, of course, the transaction management, which is the core, which is doing payments in digital euro. For that doing payments, you will also find quite substantial parts on the soft POS, so meaning for the acceptance instrument. These are the specifications which you need to build together with your respective soft POS provider the specific specifications. But for that, we also will have work streams within the rulebook. So the point is that what you will not find here, and which you also do not see on that list, is the Eurosystem app. You have all the requirements for your pilot PSP app, but the Eurosystem app, as this is something which we will provide together with the vendor to you, that's something which we will provide subsequently with the respective SDKs and APIs. At the end, I want to show you want to highlight some more things which are not yet final, but which we will deliver then subsequently. So this, you will still find a placeholder for the user identifier, which is also needed in relation with the technical proof and the entry identifier. And we also still lack some specifications on authentication, but all that will be delivered to you in due time. We just have to finalize some work together with the vendor, and then this is shipped over to you. And with that, I would say back to Georgina.
Thanks a lot, Marcus. Thank you for all the explanations. You touched upon many different and relevant elements, and we also got very different questions. So again, I'll try my best to group them. And I will start asking you about the alias and the terminal. On the alias, why is only one alias per end user allowed, even across multiple apps?
Thank you. Like Sebastian's case, this is a question which we got also from the rulebook development group when we gave that for consultation. But you have to understand the alias, we start small. So we needed to have something which is usable and something which is also proven. And we know that a telephone number is indeed something which you find in many industry applications. Many solutions out there rely on the telephone number, so it's a proven alias. But you see also in the specifications that we prepared for other types of alias. So when you go into the specifications, you find in the fields, the message types, you find the message type for alias type. So we already now foresee the possibility to extend to different aliases, but we settled only for the telephone number right at the beginning, because as the Eurosystem, if we would allow something like, for example, an email address, we would see ourselves also responsible in checking for hate speech or inappropriate email addresses, and that's something which we didn't want to take up in the pilot.
Thank you, Marcus. A couple questions on the terminal. The first one is, what would happen if a terminal does not fulfill the applicable pilot requirements?
Okay, thanks. Very unlikely. As you know, we use a soft POS terminal in the pilot, or that's what we specified for good reasons. A soft POS is nothing which is too long yet in the market. So most of the soft POS terminals out there are Android based, and from the hardware side capable really to host nearly everything. But in general, the idea and the understanding is that with the application to the pilot, the PSP comes with a service provider who provides a POS terminal which is capable of fulfilling the requirements. But do not expect anything outrage. Once you study the specifications, you will recognize it's relatively straightforward. Most of the terminals should be able to cater for that.
That's very clear. Marcus, will the Digital Euro pilot allow merchants and acquirers to use traditional non-smart payment terminals for acceptance? And if so, under what technical and operational conditions?
In general, yes. Yes, you can. As I said in the previous question, the soft POS terminal is something we opted for because it's easier to configure, it is quicker to deploy into the market, so better fitting for the pilot as we have it in scope. But if PSP wants to come with a merchant which has integrated into their system a traditional POS terminal, they are free to do so. The specifications which we published are made for that to the greatest extent possible. So we do not guarantee yet that everything is covered what you need to have for a POS terminal. But if you want to go there, feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to help if something is missing. But overall, the specifications should work for a normal standard POS terminal, but also for a soft POS terminal. But the provider, the respective technical acquirer, would then need to make sure that the traditional soft POS, the traditional POS terminal can cater for all the requirements.
And Marcus, another question that is coming up sometimes. Beyond this, which elements that are not yet final or are marked as TBD will be finalized before implementation begins, and how will it be communicated?
Yeah, I think I hinted on that one at the end of my presentation already a tiny bit. So some parts are still missing, and we will now really, together with the vendor, do our best to deliver those really as quickly as possible. So it is, of course, necessary for all the participants that before the pilot start, and already including a certain lead time, because we know you also have implementation efforts on your side, that you get all the necessary specification, and we will then communicate them in appropriate technical way through the pilot engagement with you.
And I'm looking at the time, but I think we have time for a couple more. There's this question that is very much repeated, which is, are PSPs allowed to reuse existing mobile banking app components, or must Digital Euro flows be fully separated?
Yeah, that's something which we also got quite some time in the RDG. And what is clear, you will not find any implementations in the front-end specifications, at least in terms of mandatory ways how you build things. We will bring to the market with our Digital Euro application. We will provide APIs and SDKs, and we invite everyone to use them to the extent possible, but we will not force anything. You are, of course, free and encouraged to reuse your existing front-end PSP application and integrate Digital Euro there, as long as all the functional requirements which you find in the specifications are fulfilled and then successfully tested. This is all fine for us. You can reuse what is there, but we will not make unnecessary prescriptions towards your side.
Thank you, Marcus. Very briefly, one last question for you. Will the European Digital Identity Wallet be in scope of the pilot?
Yeah, thanks for that one. I think that's a very important question. Of course, the colleagues in Brussels are doing a lot of work there. And you know that every PSP is mandated to integrate the EU ID wallet, of course, also into their own product portfolio in the future. So we encourage PSPs to try out the same already now in the pilot. So if you want to use the EU ID wallet for authentication in the pilot, in your PSP app, feel free to do so. It is highly encouraged. We are not yet there with the vendor to support the UID wallet in the digital Euro app. This will follow in due course, but we are very happy to support PSPs if they want to support, if they want to integrate the UID wallet into their app and give the opportunity to the user to try it for authentication.
Thanks, Marcus. Very clear. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for answering those questions. Now I am looking at Dragana for the last presentation of the day. But before, I want to remind all of you to please keep sending us your questions. We are going through them. And in case there's no time to go through them all, we will answer them exposed, available on our website. But now I give the floor to Dragana to tell us more on the back-end specifications.
Thank you, Georgina, and thank you, Marcos. As well, thanks for the audience for your curiosity and participation. So you've just seen to the front end, well explained by Marcos, how you interact with the end users and how you initiate transactions. Where in the backend specifications, we have a look what actually sits underneath. How do you connect to the platform? How the transactions are being processed. And as well, we will see what does it take for you to integrate into the platform. So the Digital Euro Service Platform, or DESP, relies on three key design principles. And these principles actually enable it to provide you a single interaction model. So first, everything is API-based, following REST API standardized interfaces, following modern digital architecture. And this was a conscious move away from the traditional message-based models that we have mainly today in the sector. With REST APIs, the interactions are more granular and dynamic. You can trigger actions, query state, react in real time. So what does this mean for you is that you have more flexibility in how you design your specific systems. You have a simplified way to integrate as well via REST APIs, and it gives you also the opportunity to be scalable and adaptable for the future services and use cases to come. A second key design principle in the Digital Euro Service Platform is that the transactions are actually harmonized on a platform level. What does that mean? Is that there is so-called technical decoupling model where the payment initiation and authorization are separated from the settlement itself. This separation is essential in order to provide flexibility and in order to not tie the model into one single payment journey. The platform supports multiple different payment initiation types, payer or pay initiated, and future service use cases to come for initiation, without changing how the settlement itself is executed. The settlement is atomic, it's stable. When it's executed, the outcome is final, reliable. So what does that mean for you is that with it, you will have more flexibility in the front end and orchestration side, while at the same time, you will be relying on a predictable and reliable settlement mechanism. The third key design principle is the alignment of the data model with the ISO 20022 concepts. Where relevant, there is as well alignment with well-established market practices such as Berlin Group, Nexo, CPACE. In practice, this is actually providing you with a common semantic foundation for all the interactions. the data elements that are being used in DESP and in the project are consistent with the data elements that are widely used today and the payment standards. This, what does it mean for you? It gives you simplified mapping with your existing models, with your existing systems, which we know that it's important. It gives you less interpretation gaps, but as well, it supports interoperability with across different payment environments. So this key design principle actually show you how the digital euro service platform is structured conceptually. And now we will see how this translates into concrete services that you can actually interact with. So once you're connected to the DESP platform, you can access a set of services. Here, what is very important to understand that these components are not isolated. They are part of a structured interaction model. For example, you have access management identity. There you can find services to support your client onboarding, offboarding. You have a last lookup service and secure exchange, for example, data exchange, where you will have the services in order to support the data information retrieval and secure exchange. Another, for example, the settlement service, where the holdings are actually updated and the transactions are actually finalized. Here, it is important to highlight that you do not integrate per service. You integrate once through a unified API layer, and then you access the services consistently. So from this perspective, for you who are exploring the participation in a pilot, it is very important to go strictly to the enabler for your decision, and this is answer the question, okay, where should I get started? So to get started, the first most important is to understand where the main technical effort sits. It is first that you have to expose and consume APIs. However, you're being provided with the YAML files that are already available on the ECB pilot page for the digital euro that you can download already today and include those, embed in your tools such as Swagger and Postman. Those will allow you to estimate the technical effort needed in order to connect to the platform and to check the number of endpoints, the complexity, to see if it means if it's a matter of weeks or if it's a matter of months for you to progressively onboard. Second, you will need to align with the transaction handling model, which we explained previously, because it is required orchestration from your side to manage different transaction states across multiple steps. And then last but not least is that a compliance is required regarding the API framework and rules. Those are inspired by the standard principles that are here today in almost all API projects. So it means that you'll be familiar with, but you'll need to implement those consistently with request response handling and the authenticity, which is important one as well principle, and to make it all robust for end-to-end communication. To conclude, the backend specification, they have a purpose, a main purpose, to provide the implementation effort as predictable as possible for you, in order that you can clearly assess how much effort is needed and that you can then progressively onboard on different phases. So I hope this gave you enough clarity in a short nutshell overview, so that you can move from understanding into implementation.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Dragana, for this overview. I have a long list of very technical questions for you. So I'm just gonna go straight to the first one, which is, does the API request, post, lookups, DINs allow PSPs to resolve DINs to BICs?
BICs, I assume, is it's a business identifier code. Okay,
Yeah,
just to clarify that I got
yes.
it very well. Thank you, Georgina. So indeed, there is this endpoint. It's part of the access management specification of the backend, and it allows you to indeed to resolve the servicing PSP of the DIN. Having in account that the PSP indeed can have a BIC or not, it depends of its status, of course, yeah.
And Dragana, the backend specifications mention several identifiers that all seem to be practically equivalent. Do the PSP ID, the VIC, and the financial institution identification all serve the same purpose? And if not, what is the difference?
Indeed, so they serve the same purpose. At high level, they serve the purpose to identify the PSP. But they have a little bit flavors, I will say. So I'll start with the BIC, business identifier code introduced by Swift. It's used widely today in the ISO 20022 processing message based. So this is one identifier that is used widely, but indeed not all the I would say institutions have a BIC. They have eligibility criteria in order to get a BIC. So that's why we have opted for a wider, more inclusive identifier, which is the PSP ID, specific to the desk platform. And the third one, I think, if I'm not wrong, was financial identification identifier, which is not actually a basic type, it's a structure. It comes from the ISO 222 concepts, and actually it can include the BIC, the PSP ID, the name, and other elements. So yeah, but it refers to the same purpose, to identify the PSP behind.
Okay, understood. And is the accompanying YAML file an open API description of the interface?
Correct. Yes, the YAML files that we are working on, so it's our source of truth, and it's the language between the backend and desk and the developers. So yes, they are following the open API specification, most precisely 3.01 version. So it's standard based, yeah.
And now, Dragana, one question we got on identity and accounts. Are pilot PSPs allowed to create DINs in bulk and only assign them to users later? Or must pilot PSPs always maintain a one-to-one match between digital euro end users and DINs used?
Yes, correct. So indeed, in the account manager management services specifications, we have defined different endpoints. So there is an endpoint which should be a normal operational mode that you create a DIN and you assign it immediately to an end user. That should be a normal operational mode, whereas the multiple or bulk DIN creation, it's more intended for resiliency and efficient onboarding in case there is a limited connectivity or there is a need for migration where you onboard a big wave of end customers, so that you don't have a friction in the onboarding part. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. The backend specifications explain that any second request must have a unique request ID. meaning there should not be two requests with the same request ID in the system. Even if the request initiates an identical functional response, the request ID must still be different. Can this be elaborated in the context of idempotency?
Correct. So indeed, every request has its own unique request ID. And then in the term of idempotency is that we should be able to prevent double transaction, double standing. So in order to achieve that, in case there was a connectivity glitch or a timeout and the request that you have sent, you didn't get any response, it means that you can retry as many times you want, you need. You can retry, but you have to put the same request ID and the same payload. In that case, you will receive the response of the DESP, the same response that you normally didn't receive before. However, if you put the same request ID, but you change something in the payload, you have a rejection from the DESP with the relevant reason code.
Okay, thank you. That was clear. I still have some questions related to user journeys and transaction flows. Let's see if we have time to get through them all. The next one reads like that. The back-end specifications explain that DESP can enrich partial settlement instructions that came from pilot PSP requests. What is considered partial in this context?
Yes, so this comes from the transaction handling model, which we saw just before, technical decoupling, where the payment initiation authorization is separated from the settlement itself. So it means that the debtor PSP does not send all the settlement data at once. So it sends the payer, for example, a DN, the pay DN, and the amount to DESP. And then DESP will route to find out who is the servicing PSP of the creditor DN to ask for the required information in order to finalize or to enrich the settlement and to get all the data needed. That's why we say it's partial, because actually they cannot send all the information in for settlement, but it goes partially for each PSP in the chain. Yeah.
Thank you, Dragana. Very briefly, very quickly, let me pose one last question to you. Refunds must somehow be associated with the original payment that is supposed to be refunded. The specifications mandate that any refund request must contain the identifier original payment instruction ID. What does this identifier link to exactly? Is it the original UETR? If not, what is the difference between these two?
The refund, it's a new payment instruction. So it has to have a new payment instruction ID. And as said in the question, it has to also have the original payment instruction ID. So in DESP, we are using the payment instruction ID to correlate those. The UETR, it's good to have. It comes indeed from the GPI transaction initiative for traceability. Most of the PSPs, they have included in the payment transactions, but it's not required for DESP. DESP does not rely on UETR. However, the payment instruction ID is something required.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dragana, for the presentation and the questions. I'm afraid time is up. We need to close it here. Thanks a lot for your attendance, all the questions you submitted. As anticipated, we didn't have time to answer them all, but we will make sure to update our FAQ on the website accordingly and as soon as possible. You will also find there a link to submit questions about the documentation, and we will obviously get back to you. I take this opportunity to also invite you to reach out should you need any further information. Evelyn, it's the end of the event. Is there anything you would like to add before we close?
Thank you, Georgina, and thank you everybody for listening in and for all your questions. We hope it was really helpful for you to assess further and to prepare further. As it says on this slide, on the 14th of May, we will have to close the application. And we hope that all of you that are here are interested and will join the pilot. It will be an important step forward for all of us, and really an area of joint learning and as a important step forward for the digital euro. With that, I will close, and again, thank you very much, and we're looking forward to the applications.
Thank you very much.